and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and it is so good to have you here. Today on the show, we're talking about ways to reduce the state's debt and help small businesses with Assemblyman Roy Freeman. He's the Democrat who represents New Jersey's 16th legislative district. First, though, it is that time of year, back to school, and New Jersey Senate Republicans held a hearing this week to discuss New Jersey's sex ed curriculum. Republicans say parents are concerned about new curriculum mandates that could involve lessons that are not age appropriate or in conflict with values. Others say, well, there's just bad information out there, and if you want, you can opt your child out.
During the pandemic, while our children were not going to classes, while we were struggling with learning loss, learning lag for our own kids, the New Jersey State Legislature passed two separate bills that parents were unaware of. One of which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion bill for kindergarten through 12th grade, and then a separate one on sexual education standards that the New Jersey State Board of Education, in the middle of the pandemic, June of 2020, as they were not addressing how to get our schools open, decided to put forth certain mandates as to what needed to be taught in our schools at what ages.
Senator Holly Schlotzsky is a Republican representing New Jersey's 39th legislative district, which covers parts of Passaic and Bergen County. Senator, welcome to the show. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, it's hard to believe that summer is ending and students will soon be headed back to the classroom. Parents are informed and active more than ever now about what is going on in the classroom. And there are a lot of parents very concerned about proposed sex education curriculum. So you, a few months ago, posted something about this on Facebook, and it's really become a statewide issue. So can you talk a little bit about what the issue is?
During the middle of the pandemic, as our schools were shut, as we were having to homeschool our own children and get much more actively involved in their day-to-day education, the Assembly and Senate in New Jersey thought that it was somehow a good idea to reshape our curriculum moving into this upcoming school year. And so two separate sets of bills, one dealing with updating the sex ed standards for kindergarten through 12th grade was passed. And then a separate bill dealing with diversity, equity, and inclusion also went through, and that's for kindergarten through 12th grade. And I think where some of the confusion is coming into play is that parents are permitted to opt out of all or a portion of the sex ed standards, but are not permitted to opt their child out of anything that's coming forth on the DEI stuff. And so you have some schools that are being very responsive to parents and being age appropriate and how and where they're dealing with certain topics. But we've seen a couple of examples that kind of I think blew this up in the state of, what parents viewed to be inappropriate for age groups, and teaching even the youngest of kids that there is no such thing as gender, that boys and girls don't exist. And I think that, parents are now becoming much more engaged. They're seeking transparency from their schools, as well as wanting to understand how, where, and when certain concepts are being taught.
A lot of children don't see color, so to speak. And, so what is it that with the diversity, equity, and inclusion, what is it that parents are concerned about that they're not able to opt out because they are able to opt out of some sex ed classes?
I think in some of the proposed curriculum, some of the proposed resources, including in Bergen County, it's having concepts of transgender, gender fluidity, and a whole host of different things in reading provided to even kindergarteners, first graders, second graders. And I think almost every parent I've spoken to agrees, teach your kids at those ages to be accepting of all. If there's somebody different, if there's somebody with a disability, if there is a child who is part of a different gender expression, expression, different color. But just teach them the basic foundational things of treat everybody the same, treat them with kindness, don't engage in bad behavior, instead of having to affirmatively inject it into each of these subjects. I know the NJEA has been pushing back and they don't want parental involvement, and they just put forth a new ad campaign that's tied with like school opening, literally labeling parents who question policies as bad actors. But meanwhile, just a couple of weeks ago, as part of its summer workshop programs, they hosted for teachers in the state a seminar called Teaching is Political by the Radical Pedagogy Institute. And if you looked at some of the items that were being taught to teachers to then turn around and teach to students, it included concepts like how to inject in early elementary education queer mathematics, drag queen story hour, CRT. And I think for a lot of people, that's going too far. If you're in high school and you have the capacity to digest, some of these concepts, fine. But why are we having to force it on the youngest of students?
Right. So you are about to hold some town halls to get parent input. So what do you hope to get out of this? Because people are very passionate on these issues, no matter what side that they are on. And sometimes, people just want to be heard, but that can often spiral into something very negative and not productive. So do you think that these town halls are going to be productive, and what do you hope to get out of the events?
I think the most important thing is trying to foster discussion without it going into the extremes on other sides. Parents have a right to be upset if, parental involvement is being taken away. And we keep seeing legislative initiatives as well as state mandates that take parents completely out of an equation. And that's, as a parent myself, I wholeheartedly reject that and disagree with it. But I think we have to be able to start having open, honest conversation about efficacy of policy without demonizing any sort of groups of people, and as well as how parents can remain engaged and have respectful discourse with their boards, with their superintendents, how to appropriately get information and how to stay on top of what it is that your child is learning.
Why is there so much discussion on these other issues as opposed to, can these children read and write and do math by the time they graduate high school? Why aren't people focusing more on that?
Well, I think it kind of all came to an intersection because parents were already exceptionally concerned about the learning loss and the learning lags that came out of, a 2 year of disrupted education. And I think, the studies coming forward on, the lags that children have, and in some instances, permanent loss, from not having schools open, not being able to engage. And we're just starting to understand the implications of that. So during the pandemic, when these bills started coming forward, as one of the few parents of younger kids in public school, I stood up on the floor of the assembly, because at the time I was in the assembly, and I said, the timing of this is just outrageous. We need to focus on the core items right now that our children have lost over the past several years. And then, and only after then should we start looking at interjecting social items into every aspect of our curriculum. And, that's a big concern that a lot of parents do have, and a lot of schools do have as well. The benchmark keeps getting moved. And every time, boards of ed and superintendents finally feel like they're catching up, the state comes along and puts forth a whole new set of mandates, a whole new set of new laws that turn education upside down. And it's also very costly. Our school districts are grappling with a whole host of financial constraints, transportation costs, which have gone through the roof, healthcare costs that have gone through the roof, 2% caps, while they're trying to get infrastructure for safety and security and a whole host of things in their schools, and having to turn around and hire consultants every couple of months to try to match up with whatever the new mandates of the state are.
What have you heard from teachers? Because people go into education so they can educate children. And a lot of education has been taken out of the teachers' hands because of different mandates, for better or worse. I mean, curriculum needs to change and evolve. But some history books don't have anything about 9/11 in it. So what have you heard from teachers who want to just do their job and not get caught up in this other political sideshow, for lack of a better words? People upset on both sides, really.
You already had kind of a breaking relationship between parents, teachers, and boards of ed as a result of the pandemic. And to put that added pressure on teachers to now have angry parents who are upset with these curriculum changes, it really kind of, creates almost an untenable position for a lot of our teachers as well. I've also had teachers who have come to me, who have come to my office and said, some of the stuff that I now must teach as part of my classroom goes against my own beliefs. And I don't know if I'm going to get fired if I don't incorporate certain things, or how often I'm supposed to, have certain things within it. And I think the more we inject kind of political discourse into our schools, the more you're going to fracture relationships.
Well, and the New Jersey Education Association, which is the teachers union, put out an ad that you've alluded to already. And they more or less, they're saying, hey, we're being attacked by parents who are misinformed, and there are some myths that are out there. And people are upset about it because now the parents are feeling like that they're under attack, or they feel like maybe they're going to be, their kids are going to be punished if they do speak out. So can you talk about the New Jersey Education Association? It's one of the largest teachers unions in the country. And what's the point of this ad?
Well, I think it's really to try to silence critics, and it's to shame parents into not speaking out. And it's unfortunate. I mean, there's even a website now in which the NJEA sent it out to their members, telling them to kind of log all the personal information of anybody who they view to be troublemakers in their district. And nobody knows how that information is going to be used, or what that information is going to be used by. And it's almost like a Harry Potter type of thing. And I think that, the union's primary, focus should be on their teachers. And instead, they've gotten so overly political in trying to shepherd, what's being taught in the schools to match up with, their ideologies, as opposed to being a representative organization for their teachers and their teachers' contracts and protection of teachers. And I think that inadvertently, by doing these sort of things, they're actually creating more discontent and more potential conflict between parents and teachers in the classroom. And I don't understand why.
Yeah. Ultimately, there are state guidelines for curriculum, but ultimately, New Jersey is a home rule state, and those curriculum is signed off on by their local school boards. So if parents are concerned, if they have questions, obviously, not everybody can come to your town halls, but what would you encourage them to do to be productive? Again, people can get passionate and they want to be heard, but a lot of times it just spirals into something very negative that isn't productive. And then, kids are watching how adults conduct themselves as well, for better or worse. So how would you encourage people to get involved and to find out facts and separate fact from fiction?
Well, number one, I ask everybody, regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree, try to remain respectful. try to stop utilizing, the most extreme types of words. Don't go in and call your teachers groomers and pedophiles and a whole bunch of things, because that really doesn't advance the argument in any sort of fashion. But with curriculum, insist that your schools not only provide what the curriculum is going to be, but what are the ancillary resources. And I think that's where a lot of this stuff kind of goes sideways, where a parent will review a curriculum, go, okay, this is great, or I have no issues with it. And then a child comes home from school with, books or websites or something that are not age appropriate. And sometimes the schools haven't even properly vetted it. There was a 7th grade class in one of our school districts that will remain unnamed that had inadvertently put in, under the auspices of disability, a sex toy website out of Canada. And this was one of the resource links for 7th grade students. So I think it's just very important to take a look, understand, and if you do have concerns, don't let the rumor mill in your community get a hold of you. Reach out directly. And reach out and say, hey, this has come to my attention. I'd like some additional information on this, and then be able to challenge it if it still is something that you wholeheartedly disagree with.
Yeah. Well, as a parent of 3 teenagers, I know looking and trying to find information can be very, very challenging. So developing that communication, that dialogue with educators is often the best way to go. Call your kid's teacher, email them. They can usually give that good perspective and put it into perspective so it can be productive.
And I'll leave it at this as well. I mean, as a parent of a child going into middle school, I understand the concept that schools want children to have autonomy, but it's made almost impossibly difficult for parents to follow what their children are doing. The children have certain passwords the parents don't have access to, and a whole host of stuff. And it's trying to find, once again, that middle ground where parents don't feel as if they're being shut out if they do want to be engaged.
Kind of makes you miss the days when the biggest issue was memorizing your locker code going into middle school, right? Well, Senator, we thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Joining me now is Assemblyman Roy Freeman, who represents New Jersey's 16th legislative district, which includes parts of Hunterdon, Mercer, and Somerset counties. Assemblyman, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Well, we're going to start out talking about the state's debt. We have a lot of it in New Jersey, and it's not the thing voters are really talking about. It's not what they're saying is necessarily on top of their priority list, but it is an issue, and you're sponsoring a bill. It's called the New Jersey Debt Defeasance and Prevention Fund. And it's supposed to help pay down the state's debt. So can you talk a little about what it is, the issue, and how this works?
So you're absolutely right. It's not one of the headlines. It's not one of the most exciting things. And think about it, even from your own personal finance, paying down debt, paying down credit card debt it's something that you have to be responsible about, paying down that, but it's not something that said, oh, wow, this is what it results in, because it takes a while to feel the positive impact of it. New Jersey, for the past decades upon decades, has built up significant debt. This is cost in each month, just like a credit card, you have to pay towards your debt. And we were about 10% of the annual budget was going towards servicing of that debt. So now we have a situation of when are we going to be responsible and start addressing this, start paying it off, using the advantage of having cash on hand to pay for things in cash versus putting it on a loan, creating more debt. And that's what this is about. It brings long-term financial security for the state of New Jersey. It reduces the pressure on each and every budget. So the less you have to pay out in debt, the more you have the ability to give back to the taxpayers. So it's a financially responsible thing to do.
So when you're going through the state's budget and talking about the spending plan, which was just passed at the end of June for the next year, how much time is spent discussing this? Because we heard a lot about, well, the state is flush. We have so much more money and we're going to send some money back to taxpayers next year. How much time is actually spent discussing this?
Not enough, in my opinion. We do certainly spend time. This is the second year in a row that we've actually took advantage of being more responsible towards our debt. It is, and we actually set up last year when we set up the legislation, we basically created a fund that allows us in each and every budget to put money towards paying down debt or avoiding additional debt, things that historically were done by creating a bond and taking a bond being a loan, taking out debt, and now we are paying for it upfront in cash. So clearly, during budget time, people, regardless of how much money a government has, the requests far out exceed coming in from you can't. There's just so much to be done. It's an ongoing process. It's never completed. But this year and the prior year, I was pleased to see that finally I was able to get the attention and people appreciated. You're not going to score any big headline points, but this is the right thing to do of how to manage the state's finances.
Yeah, well, can you explain for people who may be watching and are still not understanding, well, debt, that's just part of our budget, how a debt reduction program ultimately would benefit taxpayers?
When you have credit card debt, you have those minimum payments you have to pay. If you can get rid of some of your credit card debt, and maybe you might have a bunch of credit cards that you're paying off in each and every month, well, once you pay that off or reduce it, the amount that you have to pay out each and every month, and in this case, from the state standpoint, every year, gets reduced. So it takes the burden, the financial burden off of. It would take it off of a family, just like it does off of whether it's a corporate budget or a state budget.
Another piece of legislation I want to talk about is a bill that you have that would provide relief to small businesses through tax credits and offset unemployment insurance increases. So can you talk a little bit about those tax credits?
Obviously, unemployment tax is basically businesses pay for and add to the pool of money that then gets drawn upon when people are out on unemployment. There's a formula as to what every individual business pays towards into this unemployment tax, unemployment benefit fund. But think about it as like an auto insurance. The more claims you have, the higher the amount of money you have to put into the fund. The pandemic comes, unprecedented amount of unemployment claims, unprecedented amount of money going into the fund. So the fund over time has had to recoup its losses and therefore passes this on to businesses. It's self-supporting type of fund. What we did was we came up with a proposal saying, businesses did not ask and didn't want to close down. They closed down during the moratorium, during the pandemic, because it was the responsible things to do. There was the mandate. It was the public health crisis. So now we're in a situation, and some were more impacted than others. Obviously, think of your restaurants, your retails, and they were very much impacted compared to some of your more larger corporate entities that had the ability to flex more easily towards remote working. The idea was to give them some relief so they didn't have this escalation of taxes contributing towards unemployment. And that's the proposal we put forth. We moved it out. It was unanimously supported in the Assembly. It was ready to get voted on in the Senate. And then we heard that the governor wasn't ready to support it just yet. So the brakes were put on hold. But it was disappointing. I think it really would have been advantageous for most of our businesses. It would have impacted about 70% of the employers in the state of New Jersey. It would have been received well.
Well, I mean, the majority of businesses in New Jersey, so many small business are small business owners, and finding a workforce is always an issue. And you had sponsored a bill that would allow teen workers to work more during the summer. So can you tell us a little bit? I can't believe summer's coming to an end. That makes me so sad. But can you talk a little bit about that? Did it help businesses? Is it something that will continue? If you could kind of recap that for us.
So there were laws that we basically, during the pandemic, we basically made a little bit more flexible for teens under 18 to extend their summer work hours. It really doesn't impact during school year. It's really meant to be during vacation time and summertime to allow them to work longer. These rules were just temporary rules. So what we did was we said, no, let's make them permanent. Let's align them to the federal guidelines that are out there. It also enabled, think about, I don't know if you ever worked in a restaurant. I did when I was younger. You have to work a shift. You work through dinner, you work through lunch, and that's in a certain set number of hours. So we created the flexibility where they became employable because of these work rules that allow them to work that shift, and still provided them breaks and still provided parents notification about that, hey, my child is going out and wants to start working. So all that is in place, but we modernized the process where you don't have to get an actual paper card. It's actually done online. And we made it a little bit more flexible. The teens that want to work, it's easier for them. It's easier for the employers. The process is easier. So it was just one of those like, boy, this kind of makes sense. Let's just do this.
Yeah, well, and as somebody who has teenagers and one who drives, I know in New Jersey at a certain time, you can't drive after 11 o'clock or before a certain hour as well. And like you said, restaurants that, sometimes they are opened later. A lot of them are opened later than that. So did it address those issues as well as being able to, that driving time?
No, it didn't address the driving time. My understanding, and I could be wrong on this, you might have more information, is that if you are coming to and from work, you're exempted from that curfew, the restricted driving time. But this was actually made it a little bit, it was the time allotment, it was the total number of hours that you can work. We think about, and some people are fortunate to be in a family situation where their child working is for extra spending money.
Right.
For a lot of families, they are helping to contribute to the household. So the idea of offering them more flexibility, this is not just a luxury. This is a necessity for a lot of families in New Jersey.
Well, listen, Louis Freeman, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today and explain everything that's going on. Take care. And that will do it for today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we thank you to our guests as well. I'm Laura Jones. We look forward to seeing you back here on New Jersey Politics next time.